We're back here on the Sports Spectacular. Very excited. As we teased earlier, we've got a very special guest with us. And this is a guy who's, if you're an Illini fan, you know who he is. And if you're involved in politics in Illinois, you know who he is, because he's like everywhere. So joining us now is Kam Buckner. And he really, obviously, he's made a name for himself on the field, off the field, everything, but really made a really important thing. We're talking about sports, and we've talked a lot about NIL and different avenues and way it's going. And Kam had some legislation that he put forth in for the state of Illinois. And I think it's really one of those cutting edge things that we're seeing more and more of as we go through this new world of NIL. Kam, thanks for joining us, and give us the intro. Tell us about what your legislation proposes.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. And the long and short of it is that when we passed the initial name, image, and likeness bill 3 years ago, which seems like forever ago, but I'll just remind folks that Illinois passing the law in 2021 and Governor Pritzker signing the bill in Assembly Hall on the campus of the University of Illinois was a huge deal. But we were the kind of last domino in place to really make the NCAA pay attention. Before our bill passed and before our bill became law, the NCAA had been quiet, it had been silent on NIL. But at the moment that our bill was signed, I think it was July 1st or maybe June 29th of 2021, the NCAA quickly met and came out with a statement that they would allow players, student athletes to do what was mandated, what was allowed in each state by state, right? So you have this weird potpourri or tapestry of NIL rules and laws that really differed based on where you were. And when we did that, and I worked very closely with my line-out football brother, Josh Whitman, and some of his colleagues around the state on making sure that we were very targeted and intentional with the way that we put that law together. But we really did under the assumption now that NCAA would, in short order, begin to police this the right way, that they would put out some rules and some parameters that would work for everybody. And even if they didn't, that there may be some federal action on a congressional level that would change some of the rules and laws. What we've seen up to this point is that while Congress has tried to act in this space, they haven't gotten there yet. But with the NCAA in particular, they've done not much of anything. They've made some statements. They've had some pushback. They've called it the Wild West, and maybe it is the Wild West, but they've not done their job. And once again, I think state legislatures are stuck with trying to figure out the best and safest processes available for their student athletes, because the NCAA has once again been derelict in their duty. And so where we are now is that Josh Whitman and his colleagues around the state and the 13 Division I universities around the state are now saying, let's go back to the drawing board. Since the NCAA has not stepped up, we've got to change some things. We have to give the university some ability to help our student athletes in this space. We have to protect them from folks who are trying to FOIA them to see how much money they're making on their NIL deals, which would not be okay in any other industry or with any other people. Just some protection and some privacy things as well. And what we said about this, guys, was that when we first did this, we were very clear this can't just be about publicity and profit, that it has to also be about protection and privacy as well of our student athletes. And here we are now again back at the drawing board to tighten up the law, because once again, the NCAA has been silent and has just thrown their hands up, and it has forced us to come back to the table.
It's really strange. The NCAA seems to have totally given up. And when you were trying to game plan this, did you think that what you were going to be putting together as a law would be really something that other people would look to copy and emulate as well? Did you anticipate that would be the case with this newest legislation?
I think we knew there would be a possibility. I'm not sure that we thought that it would actually happen, because once again, my assumption, operating in good faith, was that as folks start to put together these pieces of legislation that were different state to state, the NCAA will say, hey, okay, hold on, wait, let's try to have some uniformity and get this thing right. But they haven't, all right? And I am now convinced that what we do here in Illinois is not important just for the student athletes who play at our universities, but for universities and student athletes across the country who I think are going to look at us to get it right.
As we look at, and you mentioned the Wild West, and I to a certain extent, I think it is, but also there's been so long. You were a college athlete, right? And back in that day, it was like, hey, we can't buy you a cheeseburger at McDonald's if you're a college athlete, because that'd be like some sort of illegal thing. And today it's maybe it's shifted the other way. Would have been some happy medium. I said 30 years ago, if they would have just started paying guys for use whenever they sell a jersey, you should get paid when they sell your jersey. That should have always been the case. What's the future going to look like here? Is it going to be a revenue sharing thing, employee thing? What's going to happen with college athletes as you kind of look at the future?
I think we're going down a very dark road. And the dark road it's not due to the players and the student athletes asking for what they deserve. It really is because, once again, the parent organization here, the NCAA, has not really stepped up and led in this conversation. What I compare this to, guys, is I think about all the times 15 years ago when I would be in New York or Chicago or Washington, D.C., trying to get a taxi cab and try to pay for it with my credit card, and they wouldn't take it. And it was a cash-only deal, and you couldn't get a cab in certain places. And then rideshare came, and the transportation network providers like Uber and Lyft came, and the taxi cab company industry cried foul because they got pushed out. When it comes to innovation, either it happens with you or it happens to you. And unfortunately, this has happened to the NCAA because they refuse to do anything. And so I think as far as the future is concerned, we'll continue to see folks testing the waters to see how far they can go with this. It is completely a different day than it used to be. And I'm glad that that is the case. But I do think, once again, we need guardrails and parameters to make sure young people aren't being taken advantage of. You talk about what it would be like to pay a player or a student athlete when they have their jersey sold. I often tell the story that I was not a fan of, not NIL in particular, but paying student athletes, right? To me, it was not something that crossed my mind. As a student athlete in Champaign, I was just very happy to be there. My parents couldn't afford college. Football was the vehicle I was going to use to go to school and to start my life. And I felt fortunate to be in the space. And I remember having a debate with a teammate of mine who you guys will know, Super Bowl champion Pierre Thomas. And we went to the Marketplace Mall in Champaign. And he was trying to convince me why it was a good idea that we should be remunerated. And we walked into the Champ Sports there, and in that store they were selling his jersey. And he made a point to me that this jersey costs $50. I've got $22 in my pocket. I can't afford to pay for my own jersey, but Nike's going to get money, University's going to get money, the Big Ten's going to get money, and the store is going to get money. But I can't afford to buy my own jersey today. And that changed it for me, honestly. Even though I was living it every day, I hadn't thought about it through that lens. And I don't know what the future holds, but I really do think that the NCAA has to have some uncomfortable conversations and see how we move this thing forward in a way that's going to lead better for student athletes and universities.
Now, we've had discussions with Josh Whitman where he's talked a little bit about things like the conferences stepping up and putting together their version of rules. And maybe the NCAA would be nothing more than an administrative arm. Have you thought about maybe the Big Ten and the SEC sit down and they put together their own set of rules, and then the rest of the conferences either go with it or they have their own maybe lesser rules because they don't have the television dollars that feed the revenue into the machine?
I've thought about that. I think that could be the next frontier. But what that naturally and organically begs the question of, to me, is that if the Big Ten or the SEC or the former Big 12 can get together and do that, can a number of schools get together and ask to have another organization created to play under that umbrella? Listen, the crazy part about, as American as college sports are, they're operated in the least American way, right?
Yes.
Capitalism does not work without competition. And the NCAA does what it does because there is no competition. I've had some dreams in the past of that changing. I think there's been some opportunity with some of the larger conferences, especially now as we're doing conference realignment, to think about that. I think there was an opportunity a couple of years ago when Deion Sanders went to Jackson State. I was hoping that the HBCUs would band together and try to see if they could, with some other smaller universities, create their own kind of association and move from there. I think it's time to push the NCAA in a different direction, and that competition would make things better.
Yeah, competition makes everything better. Makes everybody be more accountable to what they're doing into the process. And so I think you're exactly right. My question comes, so we see athletes, we see the football athletes, we see the basketball athletes. The question becomes, what do we do with, I don't know, the tennis athletes or the golf athletes? How do we make this, and I don't want to say an even playing field, because they're not, because football brings in millions and millions of dollars and basketball brings in millions of dollars. They're not the same, but you want to make sure that it's not just, we still want kids to do things like gymnastics and foot or in golf and things like that. So how do we, I'm always wondering how we put that together. You were an athlete on a college campus. How did you mesh with the other athletes, and how's that going to work maybe if in the NIL scape?
I think the great thing about the way the system is designed to work today is that it doesn't have to be a situation where folks are only making money if they are quote unquote the cream of the crop, right? And we know for the revenue generating sports like men's basketball and football and even women's basketball at some campuses, that those folks are really going to be the most in demand. But what I love about the NIL landscape is that the ladies softball player at Duquesne can, if she's a campus favorite, if people know her and she has a name for herself, she can go make money. And it's not millions of dollars, but she can make a good amount of money advertising for the local car dealership, the local pizza shop, which to me helps that college experience out for sure if you're her. This is not just about the big dollar folks who are able to go out and do that. I think this does allow some evening of the playing field for the non-revenue generating sports. And I will also say, I've had conversations with folks who are student athletes on campuses that aren't huge, that are not even the best player on the team. They're a fan favorite. They got a personality. Like some folks just have they're a walking billboard. I know some guys who I played with who weren't all Big Ten guys and weren't going anywhere near the NFL, but people knew them and they loved them. And this was 20 years ago in Champaign, and NIL was around. I know folks who would have had deals with Silvermine Sub and Insomnia Cookie and all these places at the spots. Once again, not the greatest athletes in the world, not the headliner, but the guy who people love. And so I think that this does make that simpler.
I think that's a great point. Kam, is there any chance you're going to become like commissioner of the Big Ten or anything down the road? From what I'm hearing from you, I think you're perfect guy for it if you ever have that dream.
I'll keep that in mind, man. I love athletics. I love student athletics, college athletics. And I've got a little bit of a background in sports and entertainment law, and I have worked in professional sports for a little while too. Maybe we'll see what the future holds.
That sounds like a campaign speech, Brad.
I'm ready. So if you need a campaign manager, I'm your guy. I'll help you out with that because I love what you're saying and I love what I'm hearing from you. Kam Buckner, again, they've got some great things. They're really cutting edge handling this NIL process because we can't get the NCAA to do things. We got to do things at the state level to try and make things happen. So Kam Buckner, hey, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Hopefully you'll come back later on and we can discuss this once we get as we get more and more new legislation and new things happening.
Thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity.